Before we get to the final design, I think it would be productive to look at actual ball bearing slides to see how they work. The cross-section of this drawer slide looks like this, and it's very similar to, say, the cross-section of a drawer slide that uses rollers instead of ball bearings. So what's the difference? Well, there are two main reasons for why ball bearings are better than rollers. The first is that bearings don't rotate about a fixed center like rollers do, which means there's no friction between the axle, here I'm using nails, and the roller. Instead, on a ball bearing slide, and I'll take these out to show you, the only thing the ball bearings are rubbing against is the ball bearing cage. But this still makes for a lot less friction because if you imagine you're pulling out the drawer, this centerpiece is effectively trying to rotate this way. As it tries to rotate, it's pressing the top left bearings and the bottom right bearings against their respective grooves, which is to say that the load isn't being transferred into the ball bearing cage, it's going straight through the bearing into the grooves on either side. This means that even though the ball bearings are rubbing against the holders or the ball bearing cage, you get a lot less friction because the ball bearings aren't being pressed against the cage the way the rollers are being pressed against the nails. Also, with these, as you pull the drawer out, the number of rollers supporting the load decreases. This is particularly bad when you consider that the moment arm enacting upon the rollers is greatest, specifically when the drawer is being pulled out. Ball bearing slides, however, have a neat property. If I line up the edge of this blue line with the front of the ball bearing cage, and I move it any distance x, you'll notice that the ball bearings move at half the rate of the blue line. What this means is that even if you pull the drawer almost all the way out, the same number of ball bearings is supporting the drawer when it's extended as before. Also, because the bearings sort of accompany the drawer, they move closer to the load, effectively shortening the moment arm. Now, in the design, we have a piece of wood that connects to the drawer using a dovetail, as is seen here on the right. Adjacent to it and on either side, we have tracks that would be connected to the inside of the cabinet's body. These tracks have grooves in them that are both to provide more support for the bearings and to preserve their lateral position. This thin strip of wood with a bunch of bearings lodged in it is what I devised as a wooden ball bearing cage. The cage is necessary to ensure that the bearings don't lose their position in the grooves as you open and close the drawer. Except this cage was very finicky to make, and also I realized I don't actually need the cage to hold the bearings like this. Instead, I can get away with making a cage that only fits around the bearings loosely, like this. And it works pretty much to the same effect. Alright, enough talking. Let's make it. I've gone ahead and routed the dovetail profile into this piece that connects to the drawer, the centerpiece here. And the important thing is that the shoulder, this indent here, and the distance from it to the back of the piece is equal to the distance, or to the thickness rather, of the two tracks that are going to go on either side of it. If they're not, then when you route the grooves into the piece, you're going to have to change your fence positioning to ensure that those grooves line up. You can check if the spacing of the ball bearing cage between this side and the other side equals the spacing of the grooves is by pressing two bearings into the grooves and seeing if it twists. If it does, then they're not equal. You'll notice that if I righten this back up, the ball bearing rides up on the side of the groove, and this can cause a lot of binding when you're actually trying to open the drawer. What are you doing? You want some drawer slides? What was that? Shitty. And we're back. I remade all the parts. I also made the holes in the ball bearing cage a lot bigger than the bearings themselves, and that decreases the likelihood that the ball bearing cage is going to result in the ball bearings riding up on the groove and causing binding. Comes out to about here, and then this is full extension mode. I did some things differently the second time over. The first being that I made these from plywood to make them more resistant against the ball bearings, and the second one is that I made this middle piece from two separate pieces of wood. You can see that this is plywood, but this is just Douglas fir. And the reason that was smarter is because when I went to route the grooves on this middle piece, I didn't have to change the router setup from what it had been for the two pieces on either end. I also cut a slight relief on this side after doing the routing operation so that it doesn't rub against the cabinet body. As for these two end caps in conjunction with two other end caps at the very back of this middle piece are for ensuring that the ball bearing cages don't become offset from one another. In a regular drawer, this isn't so much a problem because the ball bearing cage for the top and bottom is made out of one continuous piece. But here, there's no practical way of doing that, or at least that I found. So instead, you'll notice that if I offset one of the bearing cages by any amount from the other, and I pull the drawer forward, the back lip on the back of this middle piece catches against the ball bearing cage and forces it forward and into alignment with the bottom one. So overall, I'm pretty content with how it turned out. If you'd like a set of plans for these, they're in the description below. This is my first YouTube video, so I just thought it was a point worth repeating. If you liked it, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you for your time. You guys have a good one.